Welcome back, viewers. I'm your host, Faiza with a new topic with you, which is related to Gaza and the role of Ummah. As we all know, is the week of Unity, 12th, which starts from 12th Rabi level to until 17th Rabi level. So we will be discussing a little bit about the role of Ummah, and we will also try to see this situation within Gaza. What is happening? Why it's happening? Why we are ceasefire is not possible so far, and what's the situation. We do have very respectable guest with us, Sister Ayman Muswi. We will move on to her and we will welcome her on our show. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Ayman. Thank you very much for joining us on Hidayat TV today. Really grateful for your time and really honored to have you because you are our sweetest and youngest kind of analyst, and it's lovely to have you. When we do have a young analysts with us, it's so sweet to see them with us. So because it energizes our power, and it gives us energy as well in many ways. So I hope you are doing well, and heartiest congratulations on the week of unity, which is on starting from 12th Rabi level to 17th Rabi level. So and moving on to the topic as well, just in case, is that first question I would like to ask regarding Gaza and ceasefire negotiations. I mean, if you could share something about it, what are your thoughts on this situation at the moment? What's going on in Gaza, the root causes and stuff like that? So, how it's up to you. How would you like to share your opinion and your analysis on the situation?
So that's the alaikum salam. I do think that in recent months we're seeing the Gazan resistance take firmer control of both the negotiations and the situation on the ground. The Gazan resistance has come out with clear statements that negotiations won't continue as long as the policy of starvation continues that Israel is imposing on the Gazan population. So here we're seeing that aid, which was initially a condition for the negotiations, where Israel was allowed to debate whether or not it would give the civilian population the necessary aid it needed to survive, is no longer really the case. Of course, aid is still not coming in, but it being a condition in the negotiations is taking a bit of a hit now. So this stance is really exposing to the entire world that Israel is using essential aid, which is a humanitarian necessity and right, um, as a bargaining tool, which it should not be allowed to do. But also, I think we're seeing that the resistance on the ground is taking firmer control as well. So the IOF has faced continuous blows of surprise attacks and ambushes carried out by the Ghazni resistance. And these operations have really spiked since June, showing the motivation of the fighters, and they have resulted in not only a high number of death and injury, but as it stands, Israeli media is reporting that at least almost 900 Israeli soldiers since the war began have died. But also, it's resulting in a severely demoralized army. Israeli media is coming out with reports that the reservists no longer want to fight, that the army is facing severe fatigue for months, and that there's even been a high suicide rate because people are lacking that motivation and they are not willing to fight this war anymore. So, this is a major problem for a state like Israel because its entire model of existence depends on a militarized population that carries out all of the dirty work for them. But putting all that aside, I also think that the biggest indication that Israel is losing on the larger front is that its grip on the narrative is loosening. So the world is seeing this policy of starvation. It's seeing uh, Israel being exposed even by Western media outlets, which can no longer deny and cover the Israeli imposed famine. It is a reality now. Even the US's attempt to try and cover and dodge accountability have been flat out rejected. We saw Trump recently coming out with a statement parroting the Israeli narrative that the Gazan resistance is stealing food, but its own government agency denied that. USAID said there's absolutely no evidence of that in its own report. So this control that the US-Israeli alliance had over the narrative, which has been fed to a generation for decades, that Israel is somehow the victim, is completely shattering. And historically, when you look at anti-colonial movements, when this happens, when the narrative gets destroyed and starts to take blows, you start to see a lot of momentum, because the people, not only in the state being aggressed, are uh, fighting for their rights. But now you have people in the perpetrating states where the damage is being inflicted are no longer seeing it as aligned to their interests to have this aggression continue. And I think we're seeing this particularly in the US, where there's been a large split among the MAGA crowd. So between like the pro-Israel evangelical crowd and the America First crowd, which wants to, or is starting to want to, decouple Israel from US agenda. So this is something that obviously it's a new trend, it's a new pattern, but it has the potential to be very enduring, and it can have lasting effects. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes. And it's important to say that a lot of this dismantling is down to a unified stance by the people, in protesting, in week by week, just shattering that Israeli narrative by not allowing the Israeli narrative to hold any weight. So, yeah.
That's awesome. It's really true that in many ways the narrative is obviously changing around the globe. People are all obviously watching them very carefully, because it's not something which is simple. It is the genocide, it's the ethnic cleansing, it's the I mean horrifying. I mean, I guess after this time everyone would be questioning, I mean we all are questioning ourselves what's going on and what's our role in it, because we want it or we don't want it, we are connected to it. And this is something I guess, in reflection of what you are saying, is that we all seeing our connection to this cause, whether we like it or not in general. I would say, because it is something related to humanity, it is something related to innocent children in the laps of their moms, and who are and the starvation war on those little babies are doing this, and just I don't know how do they sleep actually. It's really really, I
Mm,
mean, painful, and it's really really
yeah.
beyond words. I mean, words are not enough to reflect what's inside us and how painful it is to watch it. So Sister Emin, how reflect, you can answer or you can add whatever you feel like adding in terms of that. I would also want to know, like, we often see many countries are trying to recognize Palestine as a an independent state and all that. So, how do you see the greater recognition of Palestine statehood by European countries, and what does it actually mean? And what sort of message should we take as a, like, as common people around the globe, for example? What does it mean exactly?
So I would say that the greater recognition by Western states is nothing more than a geopolitical move. We have to remember that it's only a few Western states that have contested the idea of Palestinian statehood. And I think it's become very clear to even these Western states that letting Israel get away with its quiet domination, a little bit of territory here, building a settlement there, it's no longer working. So this war has proven that the Gazan resistance simply won't back down. It won't just dissolve. And therefore, a Palestinian state is a necessity to instill some calm in the region. But what they want is control over how that state is formed, what it looks like, and how it's governed, or at least have some kind of stake in it. So we're seeing that France and Britain they're pushing for this outdated model of the two-state solution, um, which obviously won't work because it's already very outdated. But that's their way of trying to establish a favorable framework of governance that is aligned with their interests. So, of course, they would never want a group like the resistance in power. Rather, what they would want is a model similar to the Palestinian Authority to govern, an organization that bends easily to their interests, or maybe even someone very pliable like Yasser Abu Shabab, who is the criminal who is being responsible for looting aid from civilians in Gaza and has received direct funding from Israel, according to Israeli media, to sow discord among the starving population. And even the Wall Street Journal, it came out with this laughable piece, supposedly penned by Yasser Abu Shabab, entitled "Ghazans Are Finished with Hamas." So he's really being pushed by the West as this newfound anti-Hamas leader, even though he is nothing more than a crook who, prior to 7th October, was in prison for drug trafficking. So here we're seeing that typical method being used by Western states to prop up puppet leaders who do what they're told. And it does seem like he's being shaped to take on that role in any post war situation. So they would definitely want someone like him to lead or take charge, but we'll have to see how that plays out. Generally speaking, I do think that we underestimate the stakes for the Europeans and especially Britain in the West Asian region, but also in maybe why they want a hand in how the Palestine issue plays out. Britain, for example, has been trying to position itself closer to Turkey for economic and geopolitical leverage. They also both recently signed a new defense industry cooperation deal as part of these growing ties. And I think, especially in this post Brexit era, and with Trump being such an uncertain, unreliable partner, it may be trying to secure some of its own stakes here. And I think we also underestimate the role that the British played in regional wars over the last few decades. Their meddling didn't just stop after the Mandate era or the age of the British Empire, although they now tend to cower behind the US a lot of the time. They also played an important role in how things play out behind the scenes. So now we know, for example, that Syria's Mohammed al Jalani's whole image was reshaped from terrorist to diplomat through the help of the so-called NGO Intermediate, which was headed by Blair's former chief of staff, Jonathan Powell. We know that 15% of components for the world's F-35s are manufactured by the UK, and that recent attempts to contest that was blocked by UK courts. We know that the UK hosts arms manufacturers like Elbit Systems and criminalizes direct action against it. We also know that a British military academy in London reportedly trained IOF soldiers involved in the war crimes in Gaza and Lebanon. So it's not only a participant in the genocide of Gaza, but has helped create and sustain the framework for the war machine that upholds it. So, all this talk about recognizing a Palestinian state is not a principled move. It's not a show of this newfound morality. It is a political move, a maneuver to kind of secure their own interests and to save face now that it's become clear that Israel is losing the narrative. That's it.
That's really true, because we can't deny the role of British government and British, state in general in many ways. And obviously, it's the decolonization is going on at the moment around the globe. But obviously, when things are going backwards, obviously, it takes time and it's really painful as well in many ways. So, Sister Aiman, how do you see the situation within Syria? And so, how should we view the current situation in Syria, especially regarding Julani's power, as you were mentioning something related to that as well? So, and how many groups are fighting over there? Do you see? I mean, how do you see the whole picture? If we want to view it as a picture, like okay, this is Syria and this is something happening here and there. How would you like to share your viewpoint on that?
It is quite confusing. So I think since Assad's fall, Syria has found itself caught between a lot of different foreign agendas. So you have Turkey, you have Israel, you have the US, all vying for some level of control in the country and some level of power. But this power is dependent on a fractured Syria. They have no interest in seeing a very strong and sovereign state. So Israel wants control of territory in the south, from the Golan Heights to Dara to Kenitra, to seize opportunities to expand their influence, to control water sources, and to have an advantageous position against Lebanon through occupying strategic areas that look over to Lebanese territory, like Mount Hamon. The Israeli vision has always been to extend beyond its borders. That's part of the Greater Israel plan. It wants to take over more territory. But during Assad's time, Israel was not able to gain a strong foothold. So this whole plan was just a distant dream. It was only made possible through the establishment of Jolani's leadership. So that's Israel. Then you have Turkey. Turkey wants to extend its regional influence. And it wants to create a kind of dependency by being involved in Syria's infrastructure, so through pipeline projects and energy corridors. So this is partly why it facilitated HTS and Mohammed Jalani's takeover, because of the economic opportunities that it could tap into in Syria. It also wanted to counter Iranian influence and deal with the Kurdish separatists at its borders. But even this, again, has been difficult given that the US backed SDF forces are refusing to dissolve, especially after witnessing the Sueda massacres. So, and the Sueda massacres, by the way, Jolani was not able to control them at all. He had no control over his own forces. So, Syria is deeply divided. To paint a bit of a picture for you, you have the Turkish controlled areas in the north, you have the US backed Kurdish areas in the east, you have the Israeli controlled areas in the south, and then you have pockets of lawless areas that house ISIS remnants. So Jelani will and has really struggled to unify all of these internal fractures while maintaining all of these regional interests. I think for now, Israel and Turkey may be happy. At the end of the day, we know that they were the ones who created the conditions that brought Jelani into power with the help of the US, because the primary concern for them was getting Assad out while he was weak. But given that both are concerned with regional influence, uh, eventually I think we can expect that their interests may start to conflict each other and there may be problems there. Because, for example, Israel just seeks to expand and expand and expand. If they have the southern territory, I'm sure they won't be very happy with that. They just want more. Um, but yeah, I think Sueda was a very big turning point. It showed Jolani and the whole world that regardless of turning his weapons to the Axis, regardless of having direct talks with Israel in Azerbaijan recently and arranging some kind of security agreement, which, by the way, didn't go very well with his supporters, Israel still bombarded Syria. It hit Syria's military HQ. So this is a sign that no amount of appeasement would ever be enough for Israel. It wants a completely broken, isolated Syria. And instead of realizing that, Jelani's response to Sueda's massacres and the aftermath of the whole thing was just more appeasement. So in my view, the only leader, I guess, that would be able to succeed in Syria is one that is committed to internal unification and prioritizing that over regional interest. It can't be someone like Jelani that is blinded by the West and the big dollars and is only interested in his own survival. It needs to be someone who's committed to sovereignty, to security, even, and not just the puppet of the West.
So, do you think do we have any kind of that kind of leader at the moment in Syria? I mean, if we try to figure out like who might be, who it can be, do you see any person or any in future, near future, or maybe something you understand like okay, these are the people who might be able to do this or anything like that? Just if you have something in mind.
Well, at the moment, no. I think the closest we got to that was Assad, but Assad himself was a dictator that a lot of Syrians were not happy with. So I think for sure what we know now is that Jelani is just incapable of handling it. I think, people can control factions, but when your faction is ISIS and remnants of ISIS, it's going to be chaotic. And that's the problem that Jelani is currently facing. So we'll have to see. I mean, this isn't the final regional settlement. We're still waiting on elections and all that kind of stuff, which let's see if it even happens. Jelani might want to even control for as long as he possibly can. Um, but yeah, we have to see what comes out of the final settlement. At the moment, it's hard to find that. It would need to be somebody, like I said, who would give importance to internal to sovereignty and to security. But at the moment, it doesn't seem like there's anyone that's.
And do you think, I don't know it's right to ask or not, but I suggest it came into my mind in general. Do you think the people, because before that they used to have that mindset, okay, this is Bashar al-Assad and he is this and he is that, for example, is not good for people whatsoever. So do you think people of Syria might ask Bashar al-Assad to come back or whatsoever? Do you think this is something that might happen or can happen, or no, this is not going to happen at all? What do you see?
I
How do you
mean,
see? Because
it's
now
hard
they
to
do have
predict.
after effects and they do understand what kind of chaotic situation they are in, as a, I mean,
Mm,
obviously the kind of bloodshed over there and kind of fights over the land, and the way Syria is being divided into different groups, and whoever is in power is like slaughtering other groups or other people or whatsoever you call it. Obviously, the in the end, normal common people on the ground are suffering, not these leader or not these kind of so-called leader whatsoever. They are not suffering, but the people on the ground or the families, or they are suffering actually. So
mm.
do you think there might be any call from the people of Syria to come back to Bashar al-Assad, or they might call for somebody else or whatsoever?
I mean, it could be. We really don't know. But all we do know right now is that Assad, I mean, he presented himself as a strong leader, but when push came to shove, he really wasn't. When the resistance axis approached him and asked him to open up his borders so that it could put some, military stationed in the Golan Heights to prevent Israel from occupying, he flat out said no because he didn't want to bring Syria into supposedly want to bring Syria into the conflict, even though Syria was always part of Israel's wider occupation plan. So I think he was quite a weak leader, and he didn't also support his main uh, protectors, which would have been the Syrian army. We know now through reports that he wasn't even paying his commanders. And that's ultimately what led to what we saw, a quick HTS takeover. They were walking into to towns and villages, and the Syrian military were just dropping their arms and leaving. And I think with Assad, you'd think that a man who faced one of the most prolific destabilization attempts, you'd think that a man like him would be more prepared and would, build a stronger army after surviving something like that. But he simply didn't. And I think a lot of his own, I remember I spoke to a Syrian, and he said that one of his problems with uh, Assad was that he didn't go far enough, even in the 2011 civil war that was orchestrated. He was not making the smart decisions. He wasn't protecting people enough at that time from ISIS, and that's what allowed them to spread. So, although the resistance ended up helping and he was able to contain their influence, he wasn't the strongest leader. So, again, it really depends. I mean, I think maybe there might be a point where people realize that at least Assad was a little bit better than
Yeah.
Jelani, but it's going to take a long process, and there's so much there was a lot of propaganda against Assad as well. Some true, some not
Mm.
so much. So I really just I think it's too far gone maybe for Assad to come back. We'll have to see.
Yeah, that's very true. Coming back to the other part of our show as well, just in case, which is related to role of Ummah as well. How do you see, especially first of all, like obviously you are a young analyst and you see many youngsters around you. You have you obviously been meeting during the obviously majalis and other occasion, you can say protest or whatsoever. So how do you see the role of our youngsters, especially at the moment, in these 2 years, especially if we look at it in this way? How do you see that how much awareness they have about their personal role towards deen, toward religion, towards Islam and the people or humanity whatsoever? I mean, what is your personal analysis? For example, when we meet people, we see, oh, these are the kind of who have this awakening, and they are the kind of people who are moving the society, and they have that ability. And there are certain who are okay, they are there, but they can't move it because they are already half asleep or whatsoever. So how do you see
Mm.
this part of our generation, especially your generation at the moment? Do you think they are seeing the reality in with that pain and with that connection which is required at by these causes and stuff like that? How do you see this? What is your personal analysis?
I mean,
What are they doing and what they can?
I think that this generation is one of the most aware generations we've had in a long time. I think partly the reason for that is that we are the ones who've experienced this war. I think this war
Hmm.
has, like I said, it shattered a lot of the narratives that Israel had, which scared people from speaking out. Um, because they were afraid of being smeared with the anti-Semitism charge, because they were afraid of uh, losing job opportunities and educational opportunities. But this war has exposed the occupation for what it is, and people, for the first time, are standing up. They are more aware. They're willing to put their jobs on the line. They're willing to put their careers on the line, um, for the sake of standing up for what's right. So I think there is a lot of energy, but I do think that more work can be done to translate that energy into an organized movement. Right now, we're at the cusp of something. We're at the start, actually, of something that could be very big and impactful. And I think we can even relate it back to other revolutions and major social changes that have happened, like the Iranian Islamic Revolution. The youth were the key. The youth were the ones that were leading it. The women were the ones that were leading it. This is from the words of Imam Khomeini. There's a lot of unlocked potential there. So I think if we're able to organize better, use our strengths in an impactful way, then yeah, this generation could very well see a free Palestine.
That's very true. Inshallah, one day will come and we would be able to see. And how do you see the role of critical thinking and the role of Ummah in general? When we look at the Muslim Ummah, and how do you see any changes in these 2 years, especially? When we have seen obviously a Hajj, the month of Hajj, when the biggest pilgrimage in Makkah, and then we see like for example Arbain. Then we see before that we see like majalis and lectures and whatsoever. So we see so much. Like how do you see? Do you see that Muslims are changing toward and they are awakening towards the reality? And what is the reason, do you see, that after 2 years or nearly 2 years, when Gaza genocide is ongoing, we have been on pilgrimage, we have been on Arbain, we have been on Majalis, we have been praying, doing all the things, but our walk towards the Gaza couldn't be possible so far, if we see it collectively as a Ummah. So, what do you think is the hindrance in that, and why it couldn't happen? Because these are our people, for example, they are not. Rasulullah Khuda sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Ummah is a one body. If there is pain in one part, the whole body would suffer and would feel the pain
Mm.
and would move. So, how do you see this thing?
I think there's still some skepticism over the role of politics in Islam, which is quite saddening. but I think people don't want to mix the two. But I do think that, again, like I said before, it's changing with this generation, especially because of this war that has spanned almost 2 years. Um, People are awakening this, that they're saying, well, this is just not acceptable. We need to speak out. And I think we as Muslims, we have a duty to be aware of what is going on in the world around us, like you said, especially when it comes to our own ummah. We need to know what they're going through. We need to know what they're struggling and what they're dealing with. Islam is a communal religion. As much as it focuses on the individual purification, it also is a societal one. It seeks societal change. Um, I think Imam Khamenei, he himself, during a conference on Palestine back in 2002, he said something that really frames it well. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said, as much as the duty of fighting on the battlefield is important, so is the duty of raising morale. So if
Mm.
we are to carry out our task of tabyin, which is clarification, that requires a deeper level of understanding beyond just the headlines. We can't just read and be done. No, we need to really engage with what we're reading with. It requires an understanding of the difference between haq and falsehood. And also, it's incredibly important to remember that to be adequately prepared to confront the software strategies, we need to be well versed in what's happening around us. So while we typically think war is taking place on a physical battlefield, really our battlefield is about confronting attempts to control public opinion and rewriting the narrative. It's about clarifying truth. And I think one of the important lessons from Karbala is from the responsibilities that Sayyidah Zainab took on. She preserved truth, and she didn't wait to start her movement of clarifying truth. It started in Damascus. She was meeting in small groups and gatherings, and she was trying to explain what truly happened in just those small spaces. And from that, there are two things that we learn. We learn to adopt that same level of swiftness, so we're able to fight back quickly with our words. But also, we remember that this work isn't just restricted to people that have platforms. You can do your bit by clarifying misunderstandings in your own circles. And also, if we're taking inspiration from Sayyidah Zainab's movement, every aspect of her movement was carefully thought out. When she entered the court of Yazid, she knew her audience. There were representatives from all over Arabia. There were Jewish leaders, there were Christian leaders. And if you look at Sayyidah Zainab's speech, you see that she brings every point back to the very basics, reminding the court of who Imam Hussein alayhi salam was, who they killed that day, what Muhammadi vision of Islam he was trying to preserve through his movement. She knew her audience, and so she spoke to them at their level. I think sometimes we may think that the truth is very obvious, and we may start to feel numb and too lethargic to get back to being motivated and protesting and doing our activism. But really, the average person has very little understanding of the reality, especially of the Israeli occupation. But their hearts are ready to receive it. So these are one of the things we can learn from her movement, adapting our language and the way we approach things in more effective ways, depending on the audience we're speaking to.
That's very true. And one more thing, obviously, you are also a student of politics. So, how much, how important, and as a female, especially, usually females are not much connected to politics, at least in general. I mean, so how do you see the connection of politics with our lives, and how much? I mean, when we look at our Islamic role model, as you mentioned yourself, Hazrat Zainab Salamullah alaiha. And even if we look at the role of Hazrat Khatija Salamullah alaiha or Hazrat Fatima Salamullah alaiha, we see them like they are very much connected and aware, as you mentioned in your words recently, that Hazrat Sayyidah Zainab Salamullah alaiha knew what is going to happen and who she is going to speak to, for example, knew her audience, for example, and she knew what word she's supposed to use, for example. So how do you see that our women, for example, Muslim women, or in general, and in particular women of the Shayo, do you see that our women are very much connected to politics as well, and how much they should be connected to? What difference do you see in these two things? Like, do you see that they are really understanding the politics of today, and if there is any better way, what is that?
Definitely. I think that the women are very understanding of what's going on. Um, and they have a lot of, again, unlocked potential. Um, I think, like I said before, if even if you look historically, we've mentioned Sayyidah Zainab, we've also mentioned the Islamic Revolution. Imam Khomeini went on to repeatedly talk about how women were at the forefront of the revolution. He said that the women were the ones who pulled the men out to the streets to fight. So there's a lot of power we hold, and I think as a Muslim woman, the messages we have a lot more weight to them because the first thing people see when they look at us is Islam. So our messages carry a lot more weight because they're coming from a Muslim woman. Um, in the Western world, a Muslim woman is someone who is oppressed, who doesn't speak, who's not allowed to express her opinions. But then when you do articulate yourself and you do show that you have an intellectual take on a matter, you are already breaking that narrative. You don't need to talk about Islam or hijab before you make that impact, right? So I think that's very important to mention. But also, I think that women, we have a lot of persuasive power. I think femininity in itself has a lot of persuasive power. I think we're naturally people who listen very much and are critical thinkers. And if we use that persuasive power of femininity, um, we can have the ability to take these messages of resistance and revolution um, very, very far. So they do play a very important role. And I think if you want to see it in action, just look at the Islamic Revolution and look at the words of Imam Khomeini. Imam Khomeini even said that women have a very important role to play in terms of social presence. They should become engineers, doctors, politicians. They should be involved in society, which means what? It means that women play a very important role in these areas. They should be seen, of course, in the scope of modesty, but they should be heard and they should be seen. So I think if we understand that more and we pay a bit more attention to it, we may actually be able to create a lot more impact.
That's awesome. And how do you see the role of our community, especially community centers? How we can, obviously, as a young analyst and young speaker, when you analyze the role of our community centers, do you think that they are doing enough to, like, serve this community, or there is something, these are the things we can do some improvement on, or these are the things we need to do, I mean, changes or something like that? How do you see that, and how vital it is? I mean, how what significance do you see of these community centers, the one we, I mean, we go to majalis and listen to the lectures and spend so much time and get involved in many activities in many ways? Obviously they do have very deeper impact, but still, what is your experience about it? And if you have to improve something, what would you do that?
Well, I think our community centers are where we're able to take the message of Karbala and link it to today and give it, life. Because the lessons that we learn from Karbala are enduring. So I remember sitting in lectures and feeling a lot of parallels between um, the children of Karbala starving, needing water, and the children of Gaza. So the parallels are strong, and the mosques are community leaders and our community organizations. They have a lot of potential to really open the youth's eyes and make them see that reality, see that Karbala is not just a story, it has weight to it. It's a story, it may be a story in our minds, but it's one that can ignite revolutions, um, and it can motivate us to prevent another injustice from happening. So I think it would be, I think we're at a critical juncture here. I think there's a war going on that many of us didn't anticipate. Many of us didn't expect this scale of war to continue. I think when Gaza was first targeted by the Israeli occupation, many analysts thought that it would only last a month or two or a few weeks. And now we're in a point where it's almost gone on for 2 years. So it's something that has shaken us every single day, every single day for the past 2 years. And if we use that to motivate us and to continue speaking about it at the podiums and at lecture halls, then I think we'll see a more engaged youth. The youth are craving organizations and centers that prioritize what they're seeing in their face every day, which is the starving children and the
Mm.
injustices in Palestine right now. So if we use the opportunity of having a center to um, kind of channel everyone's feelings into something productive, that would be ideal.
That's really true. That if we are going to connect like our religious norms and activities with the reality of today, and how do you see one more thing which I was just thinking about is that how can we uh, bring that wisdom and especially the power of pen, power of words, and power of speech, which how do you see that when it comes to the people of Gaza and oppression and separation which is going on around, and when we connect it to the today's, for example, as a British citizen, for example, how the people of Britain can play their role to stop this operation. Because as you earlier mentioned, certain things which are obviously the role of British government, for example, in genocide and starvation war going on in Gaza, that is very deep, and even the Western countries and US itself. So, how the people of each country, for example, can play their role to stop their government from participating in this genocide or ethnic cleansing, and I mean, what kind of things they can do in terms of their role, for example, which is in the legal sphere when we talk about human rights, freedom, and especially the women rights. And here, women rights are being like smashed in many ways. They are being tortured while they are pregnant, and their children in their laps are being like slaughtered in other ways. So it's such a painful situation that these words can't express. So, what do you think that these are the things at least we can do through our pen, through our words, through our expression? How do you see this
Mm.
role?
When it comes to a settler colonial state like Israel, it functions off of two things. Its main two forms of aggression happen through material force and controlling public opinion and resetting narratives to fake ones and propaganda. And the best way that we can contribute to ending this cycle is through focusing on that second one, confronting those attempts to change public opinion, confronting their lies, and calling them out for what it is. It's engaging with tabyin, the duty of clarification, right? So if we dismantle those lies, we're already doing half the work. Because when the world gives up on Israel and sees it as no longer viable to their interests, it automatically crumbles. It automatically does. But what it does right now to stay afloat is it sits on this bed of lies, and that is sustained through media narratives. But as I said before, even the media is having to rein back its support for Israel a little bit because the reality has become too clear. For example, the Western media is now calling out this starvation policy for what it is. They're calling it a man made, Israeli imposed starvation, famine in Gaza. So that in itself is an opportunity we can tap into. While these Western media outlets are calling out Israel for what it is, we can also use our pens and our voices to do the same. We can use our students can bring these topics up in their seminars, in their classrooms. They can have debates on these things. People in their workforce can do what they can to maybe get their companies to divest from Israeli um, organizations and companies. And so there are lots of methods you can do in your everyday that maybe are not so loud. They might not be as loud as picking up a weapon and fighting, but it's still very important, and it still has just as big an impact because we are removing from Israel one of its primary sources of aggression, which it rests on a bed of lies, which rests on changing the narrative and lying about what they're doing. So, yeah, I think the pen and speaking out is the very first steps, and doing it in your everyday life, speaking to people, friends, family, keeping the message alive. That's something that we can all do.
Thank you so much, Sister Iman, for joining us today. It was so lovely to have you on the show, and it was so great to have your analysis on the situation and the way a young analyst look at the situation and the people around them. It's lovely to have your experience shared with us. So it was so sweet to have you. Thank you so much for your time. And to the viewers, I would say that as Sister Iman also mentioned, that we need to do the best struggle, and that struggle come with the narrative changing. So narrative could be changed with facts and truth and right words if we use it properly, eloquently, and with the without exaggeration and all that. So I personally see that this word is becoming Gaza itself, in the sense that all the souls of martyrs are like spreading everywhere in the hearts and the souls of the all humanity loving people, among them, in their hearts and souls. So I hope and I pray that one day and this genocide would end and these people would get the justice and truth, inshallah. But we will have to play our role as well. So thanks a lot for your time, Sister Amen. And to the viewers, I would take a leave on this note that we all need to do our job. We all need to stand up for the people of Gaza and stand up against any kind of oppression, whether it is within us, in our souls and hearts, for even ourselves or anyone around us. Because sometimes oppression with our loved ones or relatives and friends and stuff like that, even it's a little amount of action, it does have an impact on our soul. So we need to be very careful in that sense as well. So when the bigger oppression we are seeing in Gaza, so we need to play our role on that as well. So I'll take a leave on this note that we all pray for them, do everything we can, and may inshallah may Allah bring the justice and truth as soon as possible, inshallah, on this world, and hasten the appearance of Imam of our time. I'll take a leave now. Allah Hafiz.